everyone. My name is Aaron Christensen. Welcome to Horror 101 with Dr. AC, the gathering place for fellow fiends the world over to discuss all things freaky and frightening. If you'd like to be part of the conversation, and I hope you do, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, maybe go back and check out some of our previous videos, and most importantly, let us know the fright flicks you'd like to see us talk about in the future. That kind of engagement is exactly what we're looking for, and it really does make a difference. We're all about sharing the scare, and we want to hear from you. Tonight's selection, Pontypool from 2008, celebrating its 15th anniversary, is a fiercely intelligent variation on the zombie-infected hordes theme, indelibly anchored by film TV veteran Stephen McHattie's charismatic central performance. Exiled to the wastelands of rural Ontario, former shock jock radio personality Grant Mazzy finds himself caught up in increasingly bizarre circumstances as reports pour in of a deadly, murderous virus sweeping the surrounding area. Director Bruce McDonald cultivates an increasingly claustrophobic atmosphere within the radio station's confines, further heightened by the on-air team's frantic attempts to provide listeners with information, little of which is known or forthcoming. Lisa Houle does well as Sydney, our harried program director, as does Georgina Reilly as Laurel-Ann, the comely ex-military tech director, but it's McHattie's dulcet, whiskey-honed voice tearing into screenwriter Tony Burgess's dialogue with undisguised relish that you'll remember as the credits roll. Pontypool is smart and sharp, cruel and clever, dire and dark, and full of surprises. I'm joined tonight by another fantastic group of horror fans, all of whom I initially met on the internet and am thrilled to have had the chance to hang out with in person at various points in time. Come on in, everybody, and let's talk to Steve Griffiths, Anna McKibben, Mike MAYO, and Chris Scales. And we're here to talk about Pontypool from 2008, celebrating its 15th anniversary. Thank you, everybody. How are you all?
Nice. Wonderful.
Good. Great.
Little background. Well, let's see. Anna, Chris, and Steve, I met on the IMDb horror boards a zillion years ago. And Mike MAYO is the author of Video Hound's Horror Show, which was one of my seminal books when I was making lists and lists of movies that I needed to see. You and John Stanley were kind of like my two gurus. So I'm thrilled to have you on the show, Mike. And I'm Anna and Chris and I, Anna, Chris, Steve, we all met at, we've gotten together at horror cons, and Anna, Steve, and Mike have all contributed to Hidden Horror, which is celebrating its 10-year anniversary. Shockingly.
Oh, wow.
I know. How'd you like to feel old there? Anyway, we are here to talk about Pontypool. Let's just go around really quick and kind of talk about people's initial encounter with it and maybe how that has changed from when they first saw it to this most recent viewing. Mike, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, and let me say that I brought kind of a different experience to this because, as you mentioned, the whole movie takes place in the studio of a radio station. I have hosted live radio, and they get that exactly right. What's going on in a station while you're on. You're depending on what your producer and other people in the studio are telling you. You're getting people talking in your ear and telling you things, and you're not sure what else is going on. Never anything like this. I was not a shock jock. I was just doing the movie show on radio. But we were taking live calls, and you never know exactly what's going to come next. That is the great thing about live radio. And one, Stephen McHattie's character is absolutely dead on. The abrasive, intelligent, weird people you meet. And it's kind of laid into the movie, but he's only been there a short time because he just got fired from the last station he was at. And as they say in radio, if you haven't been fired, you haven't been in radio very long. and so they nailed the beginning absolutely perfectly.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, it's awesome perspective. I remember I've done a couple of interviews at radio shows, and I'm always impressed by how seamless they make it all, considering just how chaotic it is. You know, you do have people like, you know, sending messages through screens and people talking in your ear, people actually handing you things, and they just make it flow so easily. And when they let people know that there's chaos, they also do that in a seamless way.
Yep.
They're like, yep, and I've just been handed this piece that's on fire right now. So, Chris, I want to go to you next because I know this was your first time watching it, correct?
Yes. I'd watched bits and pieces throughout the years, and I never got to watch the entire thing in one sitting until now.
And how did it go over for you on this most recent complete viewing?
Just one of the things that drew me to horror when I was a kid is just the originality. I seek out, original films. I seek out original, just pieces of media. And when I watched this, it just kind of reinforced why I love horror so much. Is just different takes on the genre. And, I was really just amazed by how much audio and sound design seems to just play a big factor into this film. And doing some background information after I watched the movie, I was like, man, this really sounds like some sort of radio drama that my grandparents used to grow up listening to. So just during exactly it's what it sounded like. So just during one of the chaotic scenes, I would just kind of close my eyes and see if I can envision it. And that's what stood out to me the most. It was just I was in awe of how just the audio just brought you into the movie, and its sole point of tension and suspense all comes from audio, and it all happens all in one little area. So I really enjoyed it. I really did. It's something that I will definitely revisit in the future.
That was just such a cool reflection because Chris, the first time I saw this movie was when it came out, and I have not watched it again until earlier today. And I didn't pick up on that angle at the time. And today when I watched it, I kept thinking it felt like an inversion of that, infamous War of the Worlds radio broadcast. So it's just cool to hear you say that. Yeah, I saw this when it came out. I feel like it was part of a really interesting era of straight to DVD movies that were, I think probably what today would be called elevated horror, but I don't like that phrase. But
I hadn't heard that before.
It's kind of making the waves right now. I came to this movie because I was actually a fan of the director, Bruce McDonald, who is not a horror movie director at that point in time. He mostly did road movies that were music themed, punk rock movies. So I was really interested to see what he was going to do with a genre movie.
So the first time I saw this, it was one of the films at the Music Box Massacre, which I think is now the Music Box of Horrors. It's sort of changed hands. If anyone's not familiar, that's a 24-hour horror movie marathon that takes place at the Music Box Theater in Chicago. And this is one of the movies. And I think it was maybe the year it came out. It was kind of like one of those, we were touring with the film and got the chance to show it in a theater in the United States, because it didn't get a theatrical release here in the States. I left the theater with a friend of ours to go down the street to get some snacks. And because I was like, I've never heard of this movie. I'm sure it's skippable. And so we cut out on like the first act. And when we came back, Stuart Gordon is like sitting in the seat. And if you're not familiar, if you've never seen Stuart Gordon, he was a big guy. I mean, big in every direction, big and an intimidating dude. Like I had to like climb over him to get to an empty seat, which is the most awkward thing because the aisles are this big and the seats are this big, and like, are you fucking kidding me? I had to crawl over this guy. So we watched the rest of the movie and I was like not impressed with it, honest to God. And I'm sure, it's because you miss so much key information in the first act. So that's a me problem. I was so like pissed at like everything. So I didn't enjoy the rest of the movie. I only liked Stephen McHattie's performance. I was like, that guy is great. Everything else can go to hell. And I was just like upset about it. And then maybe about 6 or 7 years ago, I was like, you know what? I should watch that movie again and give it a fair shake in the comfort of my own home, where I don't have to crawl over a mountain of a man to get to the good scenes. Right? So I watched it again with totally fresh eyes and a fresh perspective, and it's absolutely like it would work as a radio production. Actually, my first thought was this would make a really compelling stage production. This could work on stage because it's really like a one setting piece. You could easily adapt it to work for that. Minimal cast. I think it'd be like fascinating if somebody would adapt that for the stage. I'd go see that, no problem. Watching it later in a separate setting was hugely beneficial. I love the movie now. It's almost ahead of its time too, in a way, in the way that it talks about language being viral and how damaging language has the potential to be, how viral and how hurtful it ultimately can be. I know that's not maybe necessarily like the message, but I think that's a really like important takeaway from the film. And it's something that really hit watching it just the other day, given everything that's happened in this country. We've seen what kind of damage language on its own can do. Watching it now, it feels even more ahead of its time in that regard.
It's the old adage, if you can't step in the same river twice, you can't watch the same movie twice. And every time, I mean, I remember watching this for the first time. It may have been at the Music Box as well, but I feel like I saw it at home. But I remember thinking, this movie is so much smarter than me. You know, I'm hanging on by my fingernails, like trying to keep up with it. And I love a smart horror movie, one that doesn't give me all the answers and really does require me to lean in and be like, wait, hang on, what's happening here? And I've had that experience every time I've watched this movie. I think this is probably the third or fourth time that I've watched it. But, you know, having gone through a literal pandemic with a virus that affects people differently, that people don't have the same symptoms, that people deny, that people, you know, are afraid of, that people, it's just like I was, you know, again, watching this through a completely different filter, and it felt like a commentary on COVID. And of course it couldn't have been that, you know, having been made 15 years ago. But I absolutely was watching this through pandemic eyes and going, wow, like so much of this is so relevant. And I would love people to go back and revisit this, you know, because I was at a convention recently and I was talking about Pontypool, the fact that we were going to be doing it on the show. And I would say 50% of the people did not know what I was talking about. Like they'd never heard of this movie. And I was like, oh no. Like I hate to think that Pontypool has fallen off the radar. It's not the bright, shiny object.
Yeah, which is such a shame. It is one that I think it stays relevant and has the potential to continue to stay relevant. Like there's nothing about the film that feels dated. I hate it when movies like date themselves. No, I don't want to say I hate it. It's just,
it's unfortunate, you know, like it's like,
yeah.
Technology moved forward and the movie couldn't have known that we were going to have cell phones, you know.
Right. And I think there's nothing about this film that feels like you couldn't watch it in 20 years and it would still feel like very particular and very relevant. Well,
and I also feel like, you know, considering how, you know, the zombie movie, you know, it was such a thing in 2008. And here, you know, like I was like, do not give me one more zombie movie. I just can't take another zombie movie. And yet this zombie movie, it's not the dead coming back to life and it's not them trying to eat you. It's them, like their brain is melting inside of their head in front of you. Who would have guessed you could tell a zombie movie in a different way in this day and age, you know, like 6 years after 28 Days Later, you know, basically just reignited it for us.
You don't really see one person die in the movie, and the rest of the violence happens pretty much off screen.
Right.
And, you know, how many zombie movies can you really say, you know, since, you know, Romero's time that really does that and can still be that effective? And also something that you were mentioning, Anna, you know, about language and how people react to language, you know, a couple of years ago, 6-7 years ago, that kind of also dawned on me of, look at how the reactions of people are just from a few words. You know, how it can send people into such a frenzy, and it can take the sweetest, most innocent person in the world, somebody, you know, like the character in the film. I'm sorry, her name escapes me, but now, but you know, she just came back from a tour in Afghanistan. You know, she's a
Laurel-Ann.
hero.
Laurel-Ann,
Yeah. And she, you know, she comes back, and you know, she's doing her job. She's keeping everything all together, and then it's just that little bit of language it gets into her, and it sends her. It completely changes who they are. And so just kind of going down the rabbit hole with it a little more, the more that I think about it, the more that I appreciate the effort that went into just the story, just to come up with this concept.
And Tony Burgess, the screenwriter, this was based on his novel, which is called Pontypool Changes Everything. And it's interesting listening to the commentary, because in his mind, you know, on the commentary, basically he and McDonald talk about Pontypool 2 and 3, the movies that they want to make. And those movies are much more explicit and grand. And they're, you know, we want to see people tearing each other apart. All the things that happen kind of in an audio drama kind of way, which I'm like, oh no, that would be terrible. Like, I love the fact that it becomes theater of the mind, you know, and those images of like somebody trying to put their arm inside somebody, or, you know, like he has stumps and there's a little voice coming out of his mouth. And you're like, it goes into that kind of nightmare place of your brain where you're like, I don't even know what that is. And now I have to think about what that could possibly be.
I also noted, seeing it this time, second time, the humor. This is the weirdest. Some of the jokes just kind of, you know, sneak up on you. And I just, particularly towards the end, where, you know, are we going to give a genocide an elevator track? I mean, it's just weird stuff that, you know, you really didn't expect to hear. And I think it's part of the intelligence of the script that really kind of brings it up. And Aaron, I want to ask you a question. You have been a professional actor. Is this not one of the great roles? All the language that is in there.
It's such a rich, you know, tapestry of dialogue and monologue and imagery. You know, I love the fact that it flips back and forth between French and English. And I think, and I do think this was done as a stage play, or has been done as a stage play before, because as you say, it is just one set and it doesn't require much in the way of special effects. One of the things that struck me was it is so much theater and it is so much, you know, radio. Like, it is all about audio. It's all about the things that we hear, which is why it kills me when Lawrence and the Arabians come in blackface on the radio. I'm like, you don't need to be in blackface on the radio. Like, you shouldn't be in blackface, period. But you really don't need to be in blackface on the radio.
That whole scene just went over. I was like, wait, what? That can't be what I. So I was like, wow.
Yeah,
I thought it needed that, again, that weird humor there. The way that scene ends with the silly little toy assault weapon, click, 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 that is just, and the big scare that's in it too. That great, which is kind of your first big weird moment in the movie. Well, except for the very beginning.
I'm glad you mentioned the humor, Mike, because I didn't notice the humor the first time I saw it. I think the first half of the movie is significantly scarier than the second half once the outside world starts to come into the radio station. But I think I was so engrossed with, you know, the theater of the mind, as you said, Aaron, that I missed a lot of the humor the first time around. Because especially there were some scenes where I'm just thinking, why is this even happening? And you know, and the Lawrence of Arabia scene is wild, and I don't believe there's any excuse for blackface ever. But I do feel like that was an intentional choice, because I also didn't know. I don't remember, and this is where I think the movie might feel not dated, but of its time, in terms of it seemed to be trying to make some kind of commentary on xenophobia in the movie. And I didn't not catch that the first time around. in terms of sort of post 9/11 society.
Exactly.
There's several comments about the BBC calling about Canadian separatist terrorist groups, right? And then, the whole idea that it's the English language, but it's okay to speak French or another language, right? So I feel like even though that was a misguided choice, I feel like it was an intentional choice. It wasn't just sort of like, oh, we're just going to do this. I feel like it was part of, here's a slice of small town life where they would make this bad choice.
And not to apologize for Lawrence of Arabia, but I thought that they were coming in as it was some kind of local production they'd done, and they were wearing the makeup that they would have worn on stage,
right?
At the local VA or something like that.
Yeah.
Another thing that kind of brought me back to the idea of the COVID view is that everyone is locked inside, and all the information we're getting is coming from the outside. Like getting information during the time of COVID was really tough, and it was completely mixed.
Yeah.
Like we didn't know who to trust. We didn't know what was happening. One expert was saying one thing, one expert was saying another thing. And the idea of first Dr. Mendez says, but then he can't stop talking, and then Grant Mazzy's like, stop talking. And then they're like, should we be doing this? We probably shouldn't be talking. And everybody's like, it just brought me back to, I'm like, yeah, we probably shouldn't be gathering in groups while we're gathering in groups, talking about whether we should be gathering in groups or not.
It's so wild. We never would have noticed that the first time around watching it.
But also something that, that mutates and, affects people differently. That was the thing. Like, pretty much we have rules in zombie movies. And here we don't know what the rules are. And, Doc Mendez coming in and explaining it, I'm kind of like, yes, he kind of explains it, but
exactly.
Not, it's not a good explanation. It's as plausible as anything that Fauci was saying in the early parts. You're like, okay, all right.
Wear a mask. Don't wear a mask.
Right.
And you get the call from the BBC, like they're the experts in everything, and they know less than you do.
It almost sounds like this movie should have some sort of a re-release, a small re-release.
Right.
It's like, hey, remember COVID? Well, here's the COVID movie.
Like Grant has a moment where he's saying, is this all just a joke? Like, is this all just for me? Because he's the central figure that everybody is feeding information to. So he is kind of our vehicle. And that moment when he leaves the booth and is like, I have to get outside because I need to have something that's tangibly coming in through my sensory organs as opposed to just information being fed to me.
Yeah, it does kind of feel like the joke is being played on us as well. It's just like, what? Just kidding. Like, we've hazed you on your first day in small town Canada. Like, LOL. Everything's ship-shape now. Here's a kid in blackface. Like, yeah, I mean, that is such a good moment that ends up backfiring completely. Like, you want to see it with your own eyes. Okay, it's like breaking through the door right now. And also, what the hell is going on? Because they're just echoing. It's just that echolalia type of effect that they're just saying everything that Sydney is repeating. So they all get that what the fuck moment.
Yeah.
And I think it hit Stephen McHattie's character right as he learned that the Sunshine helicopter is not actually a helicopter. It is just
a Dodge Dart on a hill or something.
So had I been told that and been in this same situation, I've been like, oh, you guys are fucking with me. I know you are. You already told me you are. So,
but it's all about illusion, right? It's all about the whole thing is an illusion. The Sunshine Chopper is an illusion. Program itself is an illusion. It's something where we put it out there and we intend to buy it or we don't buy it. But what Grant talks about, the idea of a pissed off listener being an active listener, like he's looking to poke you, and that was something that definitely, all the shock jocks from Howard Stern on, where they were looking to provoke their audiences.
As a radio host, I can tell you, my boss told me, your job is to attract and retain listeners.
By any means necessary.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Because you know, even if people are hate listening to your show, they're still listening.
Exactly. And they're calling.
And controversy sells. Controversy attracts.
Mm-hmm.
So got to make people feel one way or the other.
You know, the funny thing about the movie, too, that I don't think I really noticed this. So, you know, when it came out, Aaron, I think you mentioned earlier, it was part of this, you know, resurgence of zombie movies. And I was one of the people who was getting bored of zombie movies. And I was very pleased by this one because it, you know, even though, you know, whether it's a zombie or movie or not is up for debate, I think it is. But, you know, it does inject something completely new into it. And you mostly don't see the zombies until the end. But it just as much as it is a zombie movie, it's also a workplace horror movie, right? So like we're trapped. Like, could you imagine anything worse than, I mean, you know, Anna, you can answer this question very diplomatically, but anything worse than being trapped at your job during a local apocalyptic event? And what do they do? They go back to work, right? They're like, well, the only way that we can figure out how to stop this is by getting back and reading these obituaries and having this bit of normalcy, right? It's, I don't think I quite picked up on that the first time I watched it, that this is just as much a workplace horror movie as it is a zombie movie.
And honestly, I hadn't thought of the fact that like that idea of going back to normalcy, doing your job as a coping device. So many of us felt adrift when we couldn't go to work. Like, I don't know what to do with myself. And, you know, them calling people essential workers versus non-essential workers. And I don't have a purpose. I don't know what I'm supposed to do right now other than just take in all this information. You know, kind of zipping to the end. I'll go ahead and throw up the spoilers banner really quick.
Yeah.
But the idea of the end where, you know, you hear in French, you know, they're telling Grant Mazzy to stop broadcasting. And what he's broadcasting is nonsense. Like he's flailing at trying to find a cure. He's flailing at trying to be of service. And what's interesting is because my wife and I kind of had a little discussion about like, was it the right thing to do? Because he really didn't know what he was doing. And he could have sent out the wrong word and this countdown. And he may have, exactly. Well, I mean, clearly the virus is still spreading at the end of the movie. Can we talk about the ending? the coda after the credits? Because I think the credits are great. I love the fact that we're getting all these kind of like radio broadcasts. And then we have this coda where it's Sydney and Grant, and they're kind of sitting in a bar in black and white.
Looking like gangsters.
Yeah, I've never understood that. And I get that there's a spin-off film that features
Dreamland.
Dreamland that features that, what is it, Johnny Deadeyes or something character. I've never understood that in context, in relation to what we've just seen. And I think it's like the most frustrating thing for me. I'm like, what the fuck is this even?
Far and away the weakest part of the movie.
It doesn't take anything away from the film as a whole, but it really just makes you go.
Right.
I did read a fact after I watched the movie, and it kind of sort of put that scene into perspective a little bit, if it is what I thought it was, where I just kind of like, we're going to give these two some time to kind of, you know, just kind of do their own thing in front of the camera, but won't really mean anything. But
they were married at the time.
That's what I was going to bring up, is that they were married. That put that scene a little bit more into perspective for me, where I was thinking, you know, they just want to give, you know, the husband and wife star just, you know, some time just to do something silly, because it almost came off to me like a blooper reel in a way, or an ad-libbed reel or something.
Mm-hmm.
You know what's funny is I don't think I stuck around the first time I watched it, and I don't think I ever saw that until today. But you know, the director and writer are buddies. They're clearly planting the seed for a future film they wanted to do with those two actors. I mean, even one of the Lawrence of Arabia actors is the novelist and screenwriter Tony Burgess. They even introduce himself as such. So, you know, I think it's just part of the silly off-color humor. But yeah, I don't think it necessarily brings anything to the film itself.
Now, that said, I had the pleasure of meeting Steve McHattie in 2012 at the Fantasia Film Festival. And, after Pontypool, his career kind of blew up, especially for genre filmmakers, especially for Canadian genre filmmakers, which is where Fantasia is held in Montreal. And he was in three movies that year at the festival, one of which was A Little Bit Zombie. So during the Q&A, the director and a couple of the actors come up there and they kind of are passing the mic along saying, yes, here's how I came to the project. And they hand the microphone to Steve McHattie. Steve McHattie proceeds to open his iPad and read 3 full pages of 50 Shades of Grey to the audience. And then he closes his iPad, hands the microphone back, and just smiles.
That is not what I was expecting you to say.
That's not what anybody was expecting him to say either. But I also get the sense that he's also like, I'm not into this Q&A business. I'm here to act. Yeah. Because if you look at his credits, like this guy has been in hundreds of TV and film. If you go back to, he is the grown-up Rosemary's Baby in Look What Happened to Rosemary's Baby. And you're like, the same year that he did James Dean on TV. Wow. So he's had, as you get to know him, you go back and you're like, oh shit, he's in History of Violence and he's in 2012 and like this guy has just been around for years and years and years. But like you, Mike, I'd never heard of him before. And I thought they'd found a legitimate radio DJ because he feels so authentic in that role. And he has that amazing voice and he just wraps himself around that dialogue. It's one of my favorite performances of any genre of film.
Listening to it again, that opening monologue that's kind of going over the credits. I think you're just seeing like the radio
the wave signal. Yeah,
the wave signal. That's just brilliant. I just, whoa, what's going on here? This is something very different. And I love that scene. I love the rest of the movie. I think that the stupid thing at the ending kind of undercuts what the whole movie was.
If you ask them, what does it mean? They'll tell you, what do you think it means? And you're like, fuck off.
Well, it reminded me a bit, the whole movie did really, of the birds, in that there's no explanation for it. This just happened. And at the end, it's still happening. You can't end it. I mean, you can't stop it. There's no cure for it. And you just see, the main characters leaving at the end of it. I wish they'd left it at that.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm glad you touched on that, Mike, because that's something else that, I think is missing or has been missing from a lot of horror movies, especially like these franchises that come out with sequels and things, is one of the appeals of horror in general is, it's something unknown that's being introduced to the audience. And I feel like you always want to leave them in that zone where they're not quite sure what's going on. They're not quite sure, what's being seen. And when it's not explained, some people say, oh, it was bad. It was slow burn. It was this, that, and the other. But at the same time, it's like, no, you're supposed to let yourself, feel scared. There's not supposed to be really a reason for what's going on. I mean, something like, I think Hereditary was the last time I felt like I had no idea what was going on. It was just a lot being thrown at you all at once. And they don't take the time to explain really anything until the end. And Pontypool was a lot like that, where, even with all the chaos going on towards the end, with all the different languages and, when they killed a little girl who was coming after them or whatever, none of it is explained. You still have no idea why this happened, what's going on, or anything. And I love that part.
Talking back to the dark humor that you mentioned, Mike, when they're in there and they're having the debate in French about like, well, who's going to kill the doctor? It's like,
right? You killed the girl. No, you did. Circling way back to one of the things that Chris originally said about, like closing your eyes and just absorbing the audio. The only reason that I couldn't do that is that Stephen McHattie has such a great face.
Oh my gosh.
He has like the perfect face for this. I mean, he looks like a grizzled old shock jock, but he has amazing expressive eyes, you know, and you get some of those shots where like half of his face is obscured by this giant microphone and then just one like huge eye just like staring out at you. It's so brilliant. And I think maybe the only reason I couldn't, because that thought kind of crossed my mind. I wonder if I could just turn my screen off. Like, how do I AV this to like turn the TV screen off but leave the audio going? And I was like, no, I want to see his face. Like, I just love that guy's face.
Yeah, it really is a tour de force. Going back to the screenplay, there's a poetry to a lot of the lines. And you know, like kill his kiss, like that feels like poetry, and it's repeated and repeated and repeated. His whole final monologue to the world, you know, through the microphone, where it just kind of, it's spiraling through words and concepts. One of my favorite moments from this most recent viewing was his reading of the obituaries, which is, you know, he couldn't have known those things. Like, this is just poetry. But the idea of like, this person killed this person after they killed this person and that person, and then that person proceeded to kill this person. And you're just like, but it's done in such a eloquent and gentle way that you're like, wait, I'm hearing about mass slaughter, but it's being told in the most comforting voice and tenor.
And you're seeing it over those black and white pictures, the still pictures.
Yeah. Well, that was the crazy thing, is like at first it seems like they're still pictures, but then you realize that they're moving.
Stuff happening. Yeah.
It's just a little bit of like movement in the face or something, which makes it that much creepier. But yeah, I noticed that too. Like, he's reading it as if they're any other obit. And you could almost tune it out were it not for the fact that he's describing, you know, so-and-so killed, you know, this other person who, you know, mercifully put down her grandmother of 94 years or whatever. You're like, wait, what?
Like, how did you know he?
And I kind of read that as that the virus had taken over, and so he knew these things that were happening that he couldn't have known. But I think that may be too literal a reading of it. I'm not sure. It was just a beautiful section. Again, just so beautifully acted, beautifully written, and to have the other images going behind it. It's an amazing sequence. And if I'm right, that's kind of right in the middle, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's kind of that it's a lull in the action. Yeah. You know, it's like almost it's allowing ourselves to come back down from the roller coaster before things ramp back up again.
An interesting thing about it that I hadn't really thought of until we're having this conversation is because I love that scene. That scene's also, it's beautiful, but it's also kind of funny, right? It's it's sad, it's scary, it's beautiful, it's amusing. The choice with the black and white photos and the fact that that reading obituaries over the radio would be a normal part of his job.
Yes.
Right? Like, there does seem to be some commentary about technology in the movie, right? Like, here we have this town that's relying on radio to find out whether or not the kids' school's going to be closed tomorrow, right? Like, that, even in 2008, that seems pretty outdated, right? So between that, the Lawrence of Arabia Prairie Home Companion sing, where this local theater troupe is singing into the radio. Like, what is that? And he's holding up his flip phone, right? Being like, this is hilarious. Look what I'm watching, or look what I'm listening to. So it does seem to have some sort of commentary about sort of like, you know, holding on to these old ways of technology as we move into the future as sort of like a necessary means of community. I don't know. I haven't thought that one all the way through, but something's happening there.
No, you know what? I live in a really small town, and we still have a couple towns over. There's an independently owned radio station, and they do still have like kids come on the show every once in a while and talk about your school projects that you're doing, talk about 4-H and, you know, stuff like that. So I don't think they read obits. I think they've left that to the newspapers, which are increasingly dying anyways. I can vouch for that part of the movie. Is like it's true. I hope to God they're not doing blackface,
Right.
You
but
never know.
Yeah, you don't know.
I mean, I'm only
Yeah.
listening to it on the radio, so they very well could be.
And and you know, the movie being about communication in some sense, right? Like it's
Yes.
just very
Oh,
interesting
absolutely.
to think about that the setting of the movie taking place in this very small town, which is real, by the way. I just learned that today. The movie is terrifying because it's so isolated. It's terrifying because they're in this sanctuary that you know is not going to be a sanctuary the whole film. But if you think about the repercussions as the credits roll, right, and as it's moving out from the small towns to the cities to, you know, places where people have better internet access, for example, it's very terrifying.
We've laid a lot of love on Steve McHattie. I do want to mention Georgina Reilly as Laurel-Ann. I think it's a really, she has such a subtle performance throughout, and she's given the challenge of showing us what the virus does. You know, and as you, I forget which one of you pointed out, but like she's very likable. You know, she's a very welcome presence, and so the tragedy is there. Like, you know, like all good horror has that. You know, like you really identify and you love a character and you feel the loss when that character is gone. And like watching her kind of spiral out of control and watching it behind her eyes, you know, she as she recognizes, oh gosh, I'm sick. This is not good.
It's heartbreaking.
And Sydney, the other, you know, the producer, she's a much spikier character. You know, she and Mazzy are really striking sparks off each other the whole time. And Laurel-Ann is really kind of the person you're identifying with there in the studio.
I mentioned I kind of saw her as, you know, the calming force. She's kind of the glue that held everything together, because she's not there. The whole thing just, if it goes off the rails, and she's there saying, okay, she's answering calls. She's passing information in through Grant, and she's just doing it right then and there. And that's that sense of calmness that she brings. As soon as you see that those symptoms start to hit her, then you realize what's coming. It's like, oh, there goes the calming force. There is these people are now left to fend for themselves.
To your point there, Chris, like she's so efficient. Like she's so good. She's so good at her job. Like he's so lucky to have her. Like, because she feeds him stuff that Sydney says, don't send him that. And like, oh, sorry, it already went through.
And remember, she's the one who brought in the bottle of scotch in the morning.
And I think that whole thing about her, you know, being a former soldier and being a former military kind of fed into all that, and why she's so, you know, she's so efficient at everything. And she's just like, hey, I have been in worse situations than this. And so I can keep this calm. You guys can scream your heads off, whatever. There's nothing to me.
By the way, she has an amazing closing moment before she ends up on the floor. I was like, okay, didn't see that coming. Neither did anybody else. But when she's lying on the floor, like, did it seem like there was still light in her eyes? Or
How was she expecting her to get up?
Yeah, I wasn't entirely sure she was ever completely gone.
Yeah, I got the impression that they, at the very least, left room for doubt on that. Like, we're going to shoot it in such a way so that even just like, I mean, I know you say like light in her eyes, meaning like she still had life within her, but there is also
like literal light.
Like, you can see like, is it a reflection in her eye that's moving, or is it her actual eye that, you know, moves? And there's just enough wiggle room either way that it's like, she could be. And again, going back to letting you fill in the gaps on that as the audience, like, could be. I mean, that implies that there's a possibility of saving these people.
Yes.
Or are they savable? So there's a whole branch of possibility that opens up there that's really kind of wonderful to think about.
Aaron, I wonder if that's what you were talking about, that they were really hoping that it would be a 2 and 3.
Well, they wanted to do a 2 and 3 for sure. Like, but again, they wanted to be much more explicit. They wanted to see splatter. That was something that that Tony Burgess was talking about. He's like going, everybody thinks we're all restrained because we're doing it this way. He's like, no, I want to see like people being torn apart. Like everybody thinks we're all polite. And it's like, no, we just can't afford that movie right now.
Exactly. And that Pontypool is a textbook on how you spend your budget well.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It is a great independent, contained, small film. What you were just saying, Anna, like when Laurel-Ann turns around and she's like biting the wires or something, like you don't know what she's doing because it's turned away.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, that's such a theater thing to do. It's like, we're going to turn upstage and you don't get to see what's happening. And that forces you to lean in as a viewer and be like, what's going on back there? And when she turns back around, her face is all messed up. You're like, I don't even know what you just did back there, but oh my God, that must have been horrible.
Again, letting people use their imaginations. I miss that in the genre. As much as I love some of these, some of the new stuff that's coming out for entirely different reasons.
I think that's because CGI's done so much now that, we can show, 50 gallons of blood.
You can show anything.
Yeah. I mean, you think about stuff like Jurassic Park. I mean, it's just like a big fucking puppet, man. Like, and it looks great. Even if it's like slightly enhanced with CGI, like that's amazing and effective. And all you really need, I don't need 50 million CGI dinosaurs running at me. I don't connect to it the same way.
Well, it goes back to the idea of theatricality. Like half of the fun is being able to have an idea of how this was done. And I feel like this Pontypool does a wonderful job of kind of like bridging both. It's intellectual, but it's also visceral. Again, in Laurel-Ann's exploration, like she passes in a spectacular way, and you're like, oh gosh, and that satisfies that that thing that we're looking for as genre fans. But also it stimulates us. All the other elements stimulate a different part of our brain.
And as you were saying, that scene would not make any difference at all if we didn't care about Laurel-Ann.
And it's so much more effective. Like, I think a good punctuation point of viscera can be, don't get me wrong, I love a good gory film, right? It's as sticky as possible. Okay. But sometimes you just want like that one scene that just makes you go, I'm going to be thinking about that for a long time. Just that one bit.
Well, as opposed to being a barrage of it, like when there is a singular moment.
Yeah, it gets a little tiresome sometimes. Sometimes if it's done well, it's either effective or becomes absurdist, right? And it's enjoyable in that sense. I mean, we're talking about like Sam Raimi type of thing, right? Where you're just like, okay, now I have to laugh because this is just stupid. But he gets that. But yeah, I think just having like brief moments, like you said, when she turns around and it's like, did she chew her bottom lip off? Because that's really, I think, what she's done. She's trying to eat her own mouth, essentially, or whatever, to stop it, or as a symptom of the virus. And then, you get that great, like, projectile vomit, and then that's it. That's really all the violence in the movie.
Well, I will say really quickly that when initially one of those bits and pieces that I saw that I think actually made me more open to revisiting the movie this time around was I first turned in and I just kept hearing this phrase, Sidney Breyer is still alive. And for some reason, it creeped me the hell out because I didn't know what was going on. And I said, I'm going to have to come back because I don't know what's going on, but there's blood on things. And these people are freaked out and I don't know why. So it was kind of like Anna's experience. So, but I'm glad I remembered that. And now I understand why that came back in. But overall, the movie, like I said, it's something I would definitely revisit. It's something I'm going to show my wife. As soon as this airs, I'm sure she's going to watch this and be like, oh, I need to see this. So, but hopefully just now that we've been through COVID and everything, I hope this movie finds another audience and who can grow to really appreciate just how, ahead of its time as it was.
Yeah, I think it does need a reappreciation, and hopefully, I don't know, maybe somebody cool with a lot of money will like find a way to to get it back in theaters on a limited engagement. Having this conversation is a good start. Let's get the word out on this one.
Yeah, I hope this helps bring it back. And when Anna started talking about seeing it with in a theater with a group, I've never had that experience.
Mm-hmm.
But then you talked about the rest of it and having to get over Stuart Gordon. That part wasn't so much fun. I'm glad I didn't do that. But I was reminded that I saw back in 1970, I saw Night of the Living Dead for the first time with a big crowd. And when nobody knew what Night of the Living Dead was. And at the end of that movie, everybody was completely freaked out and just nuts. And I wish people would be able to have that experience with Pontypool and tell the projectionist when he's showing it to cut it right at the end of the credits. To do that.
You know, one of the things that's interesting to think about, so I'm going to actually take a step back from Pontypool and kind of look at the context of when it came out. And, you know, 2008, IFC Films, they were starting to push out. They started as a cable channel, but they were pushing out all of this great straight to DVD horror, right? The late 2000s were a great time to be a horror fan because we had Netflix, we had these other DVD distribution companies. And I feel like we were getting our hands on things that were 20 years ago might have been a lot harder to get our hands on. So even thinking about all of the really low budget but really amazing Canadian horror that came out around that time, Tucker and Dale versus Evil, End of the Line, even Ginger Snaps, right? Like these were movies that were all these very low budget Canadian movies. And because we were in that era of DVDs where most people had a DVD player, and that was the best way to consume horror at the time, because suddenly all these movies from Canada were being released, you know, in the States. So it's just interesting to think about how that is kind of a bygone era of that's how we consumed horror media at the time, right? So I don't know, it's interesting to think about. And I hope that this live stream does not start a verbal viral pandemic.
Well, now you said it.
If it has.
If it does, my apologies, everyone. Sorry about that.
It's your fault, Aaron.
Didn't know. Well, thank you all so much. This has been just an absolute pleasure. And I look forward to having you all back in the studio again very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.